Everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid and episode one of our spring football preview series. And since this is the first episode in the series, feel it's appropriate to start with the offense because let's face it, that's where most of our questions are going to come this spring. Anyways, and spring practice is a weird time period for us to evaluate what kind of team we have because all we're getting are practice reports, a couple video clips here and there, some quotes from the players and the coaching staff, commentary from pundits like me. And we're supposed to piece all this information together and make a educated evaluation on what we're actually seeing. And a lot of times we get it wrong. Sometimes we get it right, but I guess that's part of the fun because that is the jumping off point for a lot of discussion. And God knows us as Badger fans, we love to discuss things. What I want to do with this episode today and throughout the series is kind of go through the major storylines that should be coming out of this spring and talk about how we can evaluate what we see, what to look for, and more importantly, what to look for from this team, from this offense to let us know that we are moving in the right direction. And this year, more than ever, identity is going to be huge. What exactly is this offense trying to be? Not what it is, not what the goal is on the field, but what is it trying to be? And are we seeing fundamental changes in the system? Or is it just hammering home that what we did last year was as basic as we can get and we have to move forward? And to do that, to go forward, it all comes down to the players. We need to build a system that not only encompasses the X's and O's, but utilizes the talent that we have on this roster. All while doing so, having a coaching staff where we've added so many new key pieces to that staff that they're learning to build their own identity while they're coaching an identity. That in and of itself is going to be a real, for me, fun part of this spring because one thing I really like is to watch other coaches coach. Every coach has their own style. And I always find it fascinating to watch other coaches work. For me, sometimes it lets me think like, okay, hey, I'm on the right track. I hear a lot of things that sound familiar because it's what I use in my day-to-day life. And to bring it all together is when we get to the end of spring ball, are we going to have more answers to our questions about the offense? Or are we going to have more questions? That's just the reality of spring football. But at least we should have a clearer picture of the direction the offense is going, a good understanding of the jumping off point that this is creating to propel us into fall camp and into week one. All right, let's get into it and let's start talking about the Badgers offense for spring 2026. So when we talk about offensive identity, what do we actually mean? It's not just about the plays that are being installed because let's face it, other than the fact that we've been in shotgun more the past 3 seasons, the plays have not fundamentally changed that much. What happens is new coaches bring in new ideas and philosophies, and they're trying to merge it into a new system. And you get mismatches of hardware and software. Coaches don't work together right. Players don't fit the brand of coaching, so to speak. But at the end of the day, the coaches are looking to balance what the system should be, what the roster can do, and then how and what the coaches can apply in a game situation. And that's where the difference between old school Wisconsin football and new school Wisconsin football is, that the offensive system can't be what it was even 6, 7 years ago because of how the game has changed. The roster and how players are being developed coming into college football and the type of players that are needed to win at the college football level now has changed. And let's face it, a lot of those old school coaches got stuck in the past and got lucky that they were able to continue with that success for as long as they have. But identity is not scheme. Identity is a philosophy. And we can build an offense that, to the eye test, reminds you of how things used to be, but still do it in a modern way. When Darian Dupree rips off an 85-yard run, does it matter that he's taking it from shotgun? Look at the play. Other than where the QB is, how much has changed. So spring football, to bring us back to where we should be, spring football is the real first test of balancing all of those key pieces in building an offensive system. And the offensive system from last season needs an overhaul. And I think the coaching staff who are still here know that. And the coaches who've come in are here to help fix it. From the ground up, from Adi Confessor, the new receiver coach, who comes in as an assistant receiver coach from the Jacksonville Jaguars, whose head coach, Liam Cohn, was on Sean McVay's staff, who runs the NFL style wide zone vertical passing game offense with the West Coast offense flavor. And then you add Eric Mateos, who can take what Jeff Grimes wants to have from an offensive line point of view and teach it as if Jeff Grimes was in the room teaching it to the players. Right there, those two key pieces are really going to help drive us forward in terms of getting the system down. And I'm hoping with the changes in the staff and renewed emphasis on getting the right people in place and same shared offensive philosophy is going to point us in the right direction and build the foundation that's going to carry us into the season. All right, so when us as fans are absorbing the information that we're given, what are we looking for that can give us the most information and it can at least lead us down the right rabbit hole in understanding what the offense is looking like this year? Is personnel usage and looking at the difference between personnel groupings and personal groupings. Personnel groupings are your standard 10 personnel, 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 21 personnel. You know what I'm talking about. Groupings of receivers and running backs, etc. But then there are personal groupings. Meaning, which wide receiver and slot receiver do you see together on the same side? Are we seeing certain receivers on one side of the field more often than the other? Are we seeing 11 personnel formations with a running back at slot receiver? So that's the first step in gaining an idea of what we're seeing from the offense this spring, is just who is on the field with each other and how they interact with each other. Look at the body language after running reps and the sounds you hear when certain groupings are on the field. You're going to learn a lot. Also, very key, learn who the defensive players are. So when you see certain players on the field, what defense are they running against? That's going to give you an early indication of depth chart right there. So it's all building up to the next step, which is, okay, we know who's on the field. How are they being used? And what we've got to learn how to kind of extrapolate. We see a little thing, and you've got to start thinking in your head, what could that set up? And a good example for me is last spring, I saw a clip. I believe it was last spring, might have been last fall. Anyways, last season, I saw a clip of Carter Smith just giving a handoff to a running back in a sidecar, looked like a wide zone kind of action. But then after he handed the ball off, he took a step forward and he gave the indication like he was giving a shovel pass. And to the untrained eye, it's Carter Smith giving a handoff. But to me, I'm like, hey, I recognize that footwork. So they're going to run power read off of this action where he's going to read an end while shuffling with that running back and then shovel it inside to a tight end, to a second back, to a receiver, whatever. And wouldn't you know it, later on in the season, playing against Washington, that's exactly what we saw, where he gave that power read action, and Jackson Aker went inside on a little shovel pass. It sets up things. So drills are great, but watch it. You always got to figure out is how drills are actually going to be, how they apply to the actual game. So again, something to be paying attention to is don't just watch practice. Watch what they're doing. You can learn a lot from these clips. And I mean, honestly, it's all we're going to get. So every clip we get, if it raises a question in your head, if it gives you a eureka moment, hold on to those, and then you just pile on every practice. You add little pieces and you start putting together the puzzle, and you can learn a lot. And that's where we want to be as fans, informed fans, where we're always learning. And at least for me, that's what makes football more interesting. All right. We've talked enough about the X's and O's, what to look for. Now let's start talking about some questions I'm going to have about the personnel usage, the players. Okay, the actual players on the field, how they're going to be used. And when we look at these personnel groupings or the position rooms, what questions are we going to do we have going in, and what are we looking for answers for? So, starting with the running backs, obviously, Osama is going to be your number one back. But is he going to be the number one back in the traditional 20 plus carries? Everyone in the stadium knows how who's going to get the ball type of back. I don't think so, because modern offenses are trending away from that. Again, we've talked about this point at nauseum. So the better question is, Abu Sama is going to get the majority of the carries with the first team offense this spring. I think that is a given. How is the approach behind him? And when you look at the top four backs in the running back room, that is about as true of a committee. And if we are smart, we can maximize the output of the running back room by being selective in how we distribute the workload. Easiest indication of how the running back workload will be distributed is which quarterback is giving him the handoff, or is whatever. Which quarterback is standing next to the guy? Count those reps. Track those reps. Then take those reps and track run or pass. Take those reps, track run, pass block, or route ran. And then track those reps, pads on, field location. There will be your first indicator. Now, we might only see 15 reps from running backs the entire spring, but it's better than nothing. But more importantly, the patterns, at least with the QBs, are going to make themselves obvious very quickly. I think there's going to be a different approach this spring when it comes to player health to make sure everyone exits spring healthy. We always seem to have players get dinged up, and especially running backs in the spring, which again shows you how maybe the old school Wisconsin approach of smash mouth football is harder to do these days. It all comes down to maximizing the output that we can get from the players. Because I think even if Abusama becomes the clear-cut number one, there's a role for everybody else on the roster that you would think would keep them happy and leave us in a position where next season we're still going to have 3 or 4 running backs. We're going to have the 3 guys coming back who aren't seniors because Sama's graduating. And then we got Fat Boy Wiggins coming up, and I'm sure we're going to have a kid in the 2027 class. So when we look at the reps and how they're distributed between Sama, Dupree, Jackson, and Palmer, always look for the indicators. Who's the quarterback on the field? How they're being used in those reps? How do they have pads on? And you're going to get a really good indication of how the roles of the running back room will be distributed and how specialized those roles are going to be. Because the room could be as simple as Abu Sama is your first and second down and your short yardage back, and Darian Dupree is your third down / change of pace. Or you could get somebody like Brian Jackson becoming a short yardage specialist in heavier formations, especially because not only does he have good downhill burst, but he's got great side-to-side movement for a player as big as he is. And I know it's not going to happen, but I would love to see a backfield pairing of Darian Dupree and Nate Palmer, because you have two players who have change of pace, quickness, and then when you add Dupree's versatility and Palmer's better pass blocking ability, in the aggregate, you got a hell of a third down back. And in open field situations, you got two guys who can really keep the defense honest. And I'd love to see him on the field at the same time. I think Palmer, obviously, since he's a younger guy, probably not going to get a ton of reps this year. But it just goes to show how they built the running back room for Coach Everett this offseason. And I think it would be a shame if we just went back to a one guy gets the majority of the carries type of offense. There's too much skill. I want to get them all in the field. So there we are with the running backs. The last thing that I want to really focus on and pay attention to this spring with the running backs is an indicator of where the depth chart is going that has happened the last couple of years that people haven't been paying attention to. And I think has led to why someone like Darian Dupree maybe has not gotten as many reps as we think his playmaking ability should allow. And that's pass blocking. I don't think Darian Dupree is a good pass blocker. And you might be saying to yourself, why does it matter? He's a great pass catcher. That's true. But if we are running heavier sets, more run-focused plays and actions, he needs to be able to pass block. And there are certain situations I remember from last year where they tried to run variations of Spider 2Y Banana, and he just did not seem interested in contact. And if a player like Darian Dupree wants to rise above being a third down back or a change of pace back and be an every down back, he needs to do the little things like pass protection better. That is why Dylan Jones, part of the reason at least why Dylan Jones was the starter. He was a better blocker. And you've got to be able, if you're going to be an every down back, you need to have the ability to be on the field at all times. So when we look at, this is a great thing that we can look at in drills, and that we will see him one-on-one with a linebacker. Is he blocking with a good base? Is he getting low? Is he deflecting the contact correctly? Is he able to hold his ground when in these drill situations he gets a linebacker going full speed at his face? If he can't, in the change of pace category, there's a guy who can. I think Nate Palmer is a better blocker, at least from what I've seen from last season. And he could push Darian Dupree if Darian Dupree does not step up. So that'll be interesting to see. All right, let's take a look at the other players and the other skill positions and what we're going to learn from them this spring. All right, so next up, let's talk about the receivers. And this position group obviously is going to have a ton of turnover from last season when, without looking at the numbers in front of me, but I think we can easily answer this question. How many catches do we have left from last season still on the roster in the receiver room between Chris Brooks, Tyrell Henry, Eugene Hilton Jr., and hey, Jackson McGowan is a receiver now. How many catches do we actually have in that group? And what direction can this offense move to now that I think the approach to the quarterback position and the offense that's being built around the quarterback position is starting to solidify? What does this mean for the receiver room? And as always, it kind of comes down to versatility. And when you play an offense that is so predicated on the use of tight ends, fullbacks, and multiple backs, you need receivers who can play multiple roles if you look at the traditional offensive setup. Back in the day, you'd have your flanker, your speed guy that you'd put on the field side, guy who would run off the top of the formation, run off the top of the defense. You'd have your backside split end, who's a little bit more of your possession guy, guy who's going to go across the middle, guy who's going to work from the short side of the field through the meat of the defense and give you those tough yards over the middle. And then as football evolved, you started to get the slot receiver who, depending on how you use them, can either be the ultimate possession guy because a good slot receiver is either going to create a mismatch in terms of athletic ability versus an interior defensive player, or is going to be a size, strength, and ability matchup issue against those similar players. Your big slots were like tight end types, etc. Today, with how the offense is being set up, and we saw last year with so many trips looks that were two tight ends and two receivers, where you need receivers who can play on either side of the field, who can be boundary or field side receivers, and can play in the slot at the same time. We need those type of players because we saw last season, while I thought there was enough depth in the room that the positions could be a bit more specialized, we really didn't see it. We saw, for the most part, Vinny Anthony and Jaden Ballard on the field most of the time. Tretch was your number one slot receiver, and as the season went on, his reps kind of dipped a little bit, but there was less specialization. And you just saw the same three or four guys getting in the rotation. Chris Brooks would get in the rotation in blocking situations. But with a room that has so much versatility now, or at least just differences in body types, from your 6'5" burners like Malachi Coleman to your small school, smaller stature, geez, speak English, like Jalen. My brain wants to say Domingo, but I know it is DiMaggio. Jalen DiMaggio, And then you add in Jackson McGowan, who is going from being an undersized tight end to a big, strong, boundary type receiver. So, in a room that I don't think has that clear cut number one, number two guys on the outside and number one guy in the slot, now it's going to be interesting to see, can they find roles and get a rotation that gets more people involved? Because with that much versatility and the people that you're using on the field, yes, the touches go down. And with receivers more than anybody, touches are important. Versatility can create mismatches. Mismatches can prevent defenses from locking into tendencies. Versatility can create so much more, again, ways versus plays. Running dagger out of a 3x1 set is going to be totally different when you're running a receiver grouping of Jalen DiMaggio on the outside, Tyrell Henry at slot, and Eugene Hilton as the number 3, as it would running the same grouping, but putting Tyrell Henry underneath and putting Jackson McGowan on the backside, putting Eugene Hilton on the outside, putting Malachi Coleman as the guy running the seam. So many different looks that we can give with this very varied receiver room. And not even mentioning a guy like Darian Dupree, who could play in the slot. So I would really love to see this spring the coaching staff buy into the idea that we have a room that can give a lot. And I think the addition of Adi Confessor as the receiver coach is going to be huge because he has spent time running a very successful NFL version of this offense as a assistant receiver coach, where he's teaching, he's instructing, but he's learned as an assistant, he has the opportunity to learn how the system works. His game day responsibility is going to allow him to see how things work. And then you take his experience of where he has spent the majority of his coaching career coaching in college. He's going to be able to apply this new information he's learned from the NFL in this very specific offense to college football. And I think that is going to end up being one of the low-key biggest additions to this team is our new receiver coach. So if this receiver room can step up and we can get a situation where we have guys who need to get reps, this could be a receiver room that could take a big jump forward and finally be a major part of the offense. Because we've had good receivers before. We have. But have we ever had a good receiver room where there was 4 or 5 guys that we could rely on to get catches? It just depends on how the defense is going to try and stop our offense. That determines who's getting the ball. Very air raid idea, but also very NFL idea. We saw that for years with Sean Payton's offenses, where it just seemed like every week some random guy became a 12 catch type of guy. Not saying we're going to have any players who could get 12 catches. Hell, I'd love to have our top 5 receivers have 12 catches each at minimum. Shows you how little faith we've had in the passing offense here at Wisconsin over the years. But I am excited about the receiver group. And again, what we can learn is who is playing together, which quarterback is throwing to them, and what they're doing. Great indication of how the depth chart with the receivers is going to look is how many reps do we see of a particular receiver blocking? If we see Malachi Coleman blocking a lot, that's a good indication that he's going to be on the field because he's on the field in run downs or run reps and not just passing situation, not just 7-on-7, etc. So a lot we can learn from the receiver group with as little information as we're going to get. And it is a very exciting group to pay attention to because if that room can click, the offense is really going to be able to take off in 2026. Moving on to the tight ends. And we have been longing for the next Jake Ferguson as Badger fans. Longing so much that we didn't notice how good Lance Mason was for us last season. Despite how terrible our offense was. The fact that he was second team All Big Ten in an 18-team conference in an offense that was so bad shows you how good he was, both as a receiver and as a blocker. And so the question is, instead of pining for the next Jake Ferguson, do we at least have the next Lance Mason on this roster? And it's all going to come down to 4 key factors and 4 things that we can look for in our limited information that we're going to get out of this spring. Number 1, which tight ends are blocking and which tight ends are bringing a nastiness to their blocking. I think Lance Mason was a very solid blocker in 2026. He fit the scheme very well. And we need the next tight end to come in to show that similar nastiness. To me, that points to Grant Steck just based on his size. But we kind of saw his reps did kind of tail off. And so that leads us to think, can we have a guy come in that can replace his Lance Mason's blocking as a person and then carry on to do the rest of what we're looking for? So from the complete opposite end of blocking for tight ends, do we have tight ends who can move from inline blocking to playing in the slot and being a target in the RPO game, being able to run seams and RPOs, play action, crossing routes, being able to get open and to run routes in space? Because it's easy for a tight end basically just to play power forward and go up for a jump ball. No, okay, I take that back. It's not easy, but as a simple job description where you can just say, go to this point, go up, and I'll throw it to you. Do we have tight ends who can be put out in the slot and can win in situations where their route running becomes important? That's what we need to see. And you have just so many different ways that tight ends are being used these days that versatility is just, I keep using that word, has just become so important. From being an inline blocker to playing the slot to running split flow to being in the backfield and playing fullback. I know we have Tyler Jancey, but still, we're going to need tight end reps from fullbacks, or fullback reps from tight ends, excuse me. So this spring, when we look at the guys that we're seeing, are we seeing individuals doing all those basic things? Inline blocking, running routes out in space, blocking in space, moving across the formation, blocking with quickness, blocking with positioning, running routes with quickness, running routes with positioning, blocking with strength, running routes with strength. Do we have all those pieces to create the next Lance Mason? Or do we have to create him in the aggregate? And has always been my mantra, I would rather build it in the aggregate, because the more players you get on the field, there's just more ways to run the same play. But also, when you look at the depth that we have at tight end now, I don't know if we have an every down type of guy who is going to make plays in every down situations. I think Grant Steck could be on the field for every down. I do. But if I'm going to want a big catch over the middle on a play action pass, would I prefer to put in Jacob Harris? When I need an inline blocker to turn a 5-tech, would I rather have Ryan Schwendeman? When I want a tight end to win routes with quickness and toughness over the middle, do I want Emmett Bork or Nizy Davis? So are we going to build our next great tight end for Wisconsin in the aggregate, or are we going to try to put all of that on Grant Steck and Jacob Harris and having a dedicated blocker tight end like we had in the past with someone like Schwendeman? It's going to come down to how we're going to use the tight ends, how many we're going to have on the field at the same time, and just talking about the position versatility and the depth versatility that we have in the running back room and in the receiver room. When you have that, how much 12 personnel are we going to run? Do we have tight ends who can come in this spring and show us that we need to have more tight ends on the field? These are all great problems to have, where you have so much untapped potential at all three positions that we're talking about so far, that you could come up with how many thousands of permutations of the personnel that this offense could be very dynamic if the offensive coaching staff chooses to make it dynamic. It has been a while since we've attempted that, and the last time we did, it failed. But we need that kind of versatility. And offense needs to be explosive. And it includes the tight ends. And we need tight ends who are as comfortable running up the seam, playing in the slot and doing a slot fade or play action. Everything in between. In between. You need versatility. And if you can't be an athlete while doing it, then do it in the aggregate so we can get the quality reps that we can get out of there. So again, when you're watching the tight ends play this spring, see how much they are doing of those individual skills. And are we seeing them specialize? Are we seeing them separate themselves? Or are there guys who can be on the field every down? If there is, that changes the game. If it doesn't, that just means that our room needs to be even more deep, or we're just going to continue to pine for the next great Wisconsin tight end that may never come again because of how football has changed. All right, next up, let's talk about the offensive line. And there has been a lot of turnover, obviously, with Raleigh Mallman and Joe Brunner, Jake Renfro, Kerry Kadanko. A lot of key guys who were in our two deep last season are gone. But dare I say, the offensive line group is better by subtraction and with the addition of the people who came in to replace. The experience and the leadership of a guy like Raleigh Mallman and Jake Renfro cannot be undervalued. The model of what a Wisconsin offensive lineman should be in a Joe Brunner cannot be understated. But when you have a offensive line minded offensive coordinator, you are not looking for a Wisconsin offensive lineman. You are looking for an offensive lineman that fits what the coach wants. Offensive line coaches are very stubborn. They are very set in their ways. That's a good thing. Because in order to be stuck in your ways, you have to be able to teach. Fortunately, last season between Coach Grimes and Coach Blazik, they were never able to get on the same page. And the offensive line play suffered, even though I still think it was an improvement that we've had over the previous 2 years. Now bringing in Eric Mateos, you bring in a offensive line coach who speaks the same language as Jeff Grimes and can teach through the eyes of what Jeff Grimes sees. They see the same thing. And the pieces that they have brought in to replace what we have lost, I think in the overall grand scheme of things and how we expect offensive linemen to play in this system, it has been addition by subtraction. And I am really excited to see how the offensive line leads us forward, because we've added talent. We've added system-specific talent. We have added athletic ability. and yet we still have a ton of depth. We have young players who have been in the system the longest. That is a positive in this day and age of college football. When you have 4 guys who are entering their 3rd season at Wisconsin who are still sophomores on paper, and you have a unit of 5 redshirt freshmen who are used to playing together. And then you add in the pieces of Lucas Simmons, PJ Wilkins, Styles Blackman, Austin Kwecky, and Blake Cherry to fill in the gaps and to bring some experience. Maybe not in this system. Austin Kwecky is. I would say Blake Cherry obviously is. But such a nice balance that we need. And so when we're looking at spring ball this year, what can we look at to learn the most about the offensive line? As I've been saying before, who's the quarterback behind him? That's step number 1. If you want to know who the starting tackles are going to be, who's standing behind him? There's your first indicator. The next question I want to have answered is, we have some great tackles, but are they going to switch sides? Lucas Simmons coming in from Florida State, where he played left tackle. Kevin Haywood coming off an injury, where he previously played left tackle here, but he also played right tackle in high school. Does Kevin Haywood move over to the left side, or to the right side, and becomes a freight train of a right tackle? And we let Lucas Simmons' size and length and quickness for being that big protect Colton Joseph's backside? Or do we put the new guy on the right side, where potentially his flaws would be easier for a quarterback to see? That's the most interesting position battle right there, is who are the tackles going to be and what side they're going to be on. And from there, everyone else just kind of fits into place. So what does that mean for Emerson Mandel? I think it means moving to guard, obviously. But there's a log jam at guard. I could see 4 different people getting in the rotation to play left and right guard. And with a new offensive line coach coming in who speaks the same language as the head coach, as previously stated, or our coordinator, as previously stated, he's going to come in with a fresh set of eyes. And it's almost like having an independent evaluator coming in and setting the depth chart, because he should have no preconceived notions of what that depth should look like, and should give us an honest approach to who is going to start at what position. Obviously, we're not going to be setting starting lineups or anything like that in spring, but we're going to get a pretty good indication. So we talked about early indicator of who's going to play is what quarterback's behind him. The next most important indicator that we're going to see of who's going to play, and I don't know if we're going to see anything, but we're certainly going to hear about it, is which offensive lineman starts the first fight in spring ball, or is in the first fight in spring ball. Okay? I like nastiness when it comes to offensive linemen. And you need to set the tone early. Okay. They're grinding. You see this more in fall camp, but players grind and they get on each other's nerves and they're tired and they haven't worked this hard since the end of the season. Players get rubbed the wrong way. But when that frustration comes out, who's ready to get in there and get nasty? That's what I want to see. So if any offensive linemen are involved in fights, you put a star next to their name on your rep distribution chart as an early indicator of who's going to bring it when we need it in those situations, when we need players to be nasty down the road. That's what we need. That's part of that identity that we've been talking about, that we need to bring the nastiness back to Wisconsin football. And when you're mobile, agile, and hostile, that is a deadly combination. And that is the combination that makes players want to play offensive line for the University of Wisconsin again. Okay, and finally, let's talk about the quarterback position and what we can learn in spring ball with the limited information that we are going to get from it. Okay, I think it's pretty obvious that Colton Joseph is going to be the starter. So I am not so worried about learning what the depth chart is going to be, because I think already the depth chart is going to play out how we would expect it. Colton Joseph's going to be the starter. Carter Smith's probably going to be the backup, with Adams there to push him. And I'm hoping that's it. Maybe we hear about Ryan Hopkins every now and then. I don't care what the depth situation coming out of spring behind the starter is. But I want to pay attention to which quarterbacks are playing with what we would consider the first team. Probably the best indicator of who's working with the first team is who's taking snaps from Austin Kowecki and giving handoffs to Abu Sama. But again, what information we can learn about the offense based on what we see the quarterback doing. What kind of footwork is he using? How many three-step drops or quick drops? What is his action after handing the ball off? Is he going downhill at an edge? Is he faking an RPO throw? That gives us a lot of indications of how this offense is going to work. And as I've said multiple times, we are beyond the era where the offense can just rely on giving the ball to a running back 30 times a game and having a quarterback who is going to give you 150 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. We can't win in this Big Ten with that kind of QB play. So, in order to elevate the QB play, we need to build an offense that elevates the QB to the focal point of the offense. We can learn a lot about that this spring by how much we see him throwing the football. How many big plays are we seeing in practice? Where are those balls being thrown? Are they being thrown downfield? Okay, and how our quarterbacks present themselves in and out of the huddle, because we're going to get a wired up probably with Colton Joseph or maybe Deuce Adams or Carter Smith at some point this spring, how the offense is around them and how they lead that group. And do they have the cojones to try to make a big play? Because I tell you what, not that I would be okay with QB numbers around the Hornibrook Stave line, again, of 150 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But if would you take a Colton Joseph season where he had 18 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, but he also gave you 500 yards on the ground and 8 touchdowns? That builds the spring. The offense runs through the QB. And I want to see an offense that runs through the QB, because that is going to make good quarterbacks excited to want to play at Wisconsin. And as much as you want to give the coaching staff here crap about how things have gone, we have attracted better quarterbacks in the past 3 years than in any 3-year period in Wisconsin history before this. And maybe those of you who follow recruiting more than I do can tell me if I'm wrong, but the quarterbacks that we've been bringing in, I think, are, at least especially the last couple of years, on paper, are better than anything that we've had in the past, consistently anyways. So spring can be a really good indicator of that as well, because obviously these QBs all come in early now, and depending on how QB friendly this system is going to be after spring is how quickly these players are going to be able to get some playing time and meaningful playing time. And I hope the experiment that we had last year, where it was all about development for Carter Smith in the spring and in the fall, but then he was pushed into getting a lot of reps and starting, will change their approach to how and what type of reps they're going to give to Ryan Hopkins this spring. Because I hope we don't go down to our 4th-string QB, but we've certainly been doing it the last couple of years, right? So I'm hoping that the quarterback position, we start to see the ability to trust the QB run the offense, quarterbacks making plays, and the quarterbacks being leaders. We get that, the offense can take a step forward, which is something we have not done for a long time. Okay, and with that, I think we are going to wrap this episode up. I have done a lot of talking, and that is because there are so many questions about this offense this spring. It's easy because with as bad as everything was last season, you can only go up. But how you're going to get better leads to so many questions that I could probably go another hour and still not have all the questions out that I want to get. But it's important that when we look at what's happening on the field this spring, that we look beyond the obvious. Instead of hearing the name, who is that name paired with? Instead of watching the rep, watch what his feet are doing. Instead of watching the rep, watch what that rep is setting up. And it's all about feeling the vibe. If the players buy in, you're going to feel it this spring. You're going to see it in their body language and how they carry themselves. And I'm hoping it's positive, because I don't know if I could go another season as an offensive-minded coach with such terrible offensive play it makes my brain and my heart hurt at the same time. So that's, I think, where we're going to leave it. Thank you, as always. If you have made it this far, thank you for listening. Here's to a good and productive spring football season. We'll be back tomorrow with a look at the defense and can the defense continue to evolve and build on the success that happened in such a down season last year. Let's hope so. All right. Thank you, as always, for listening. We'll see you next time.